Welcome to the Macworld Podcast. I'm Roman Loyola. On the remote is Mike Simon.
Morning.
In studio with Leif Johnson.
Hello.
And the most important man in the room, still for 2019, Dan Masuoka.
Good morning, Roman.
Dan's the most important man in the room, as he just proved a couple minutes ago, because we had a few little technical difficulties, but Dan got us through it.
He may or may not have been to blame for them.
But the other reason why he's the most important man in the room is because he is monitoring our Twitter and YouTube feeds for your comments and questions. If you guys have any thoughts, ideas, questions, exclamations, anything about what we're talking about today, or about Apple and tech in general, or about the new year, let us know, and Dan will chime in with your guys' thoughts.
I'm going to make up a question from the audience. That is,
Okay.
Do any of you guys have any New Year's resolutions? This is. I'm gonna. Yeah, I didn't talk about this.
Is this tech related or personal?
Or just
personal?
yeah.
Personal.
Okay. I have an odd one.
Okay, yeah, let's go for it. I like odd ones.
So, and I'll preface it as to, so as people, if regular watchers know, I wasn't on the podcast for a while. I had a medical thing come up, and because of that, I lost some weight. And so I was trying to figure out what can I do to keep this weight off. And so I thought, the thing is, I can never go on a hard diet because I just don't have that discipline.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can't, I'm going to cut carbs or anything like that because I just don't have that discipline. I'm Filipino, so I eat a lot of rice.
Rice and meat.
Yes. So I can never do anything like that. So my resolution is I'm going to stick to a single serving portion of a meal.
Okay.
So I won't go back for seconds. That's my resolution for, and we'll see how long that lasts.
Good luck with that. that still takes some discipline. Yeah.
Right. So, but anyway, so that was my resolution. So
A quick question from Twitter. Leif, did you lose your hat?
I'm growing my hair back, so I sometimes I like it, but when I'm on camera, the thing is I take off my hat and messes up my hair. So so that's the main reason. But believe it or not, I actually did lose my hat. I have another one that did it, but the normal, like the kind of like Irish one. I cannot find it. So
I didn't know you had hair. I'm not making a joke.
Yes.
As long as I've known you, you've had I just assumed.
It's
you went
thinning,
bald at a
but,
young age and just said, I'm going to shave it off.
The funny thing is, the thinning that I have a feeling it's because I wore hats for so many years in hot-ass Texas. So, so it's kind of related. Yeah.
is that a true thing? Because that's what
I
I've
don't
been
think
told.
so.
If you wear hats more often,
I
you
don't
tend
think
to
so.
lose your hair.
They said that I have seen stuff that like if it is like ridiculously hot, which it was.
So it's tied into the weather.
Yeah,
Right,
and
that,
it can like
kind of makes
burn
sense.
out the follicles. But they said it
Right.
requires extreme situations. But that was pretty extreme.
I've been wearing a hat for like 25 years, and I tell you, my hair's fine.
But is it 105
It's
for 6 months out of the year?
Sometimes, not every day, but yeah, it's been hot, I guess.
I think it's bald people who are like, who it's like,
Yeah.
it's not my fault. It's
They
the
just want
hat's
to make
fault.
up excuses.
It's the hat's fault.
I mean, I would be happy shaving it back off. So.
I have a gigantic head, so I have a hard time finding hats that fit.
Yeah.
So that's
Oh,
why
me
I
too.
don't-
Yeah, hats
So
don't
that's
look
why I
good on
don't.
me either.
I don't, and they don't look good on me. So it's. Anyways, do you have any resolutions, Dan?
I do not. I feel like I'm too distracted by a lot of little projects around the house right now that I haven't had time to think about one. But I probably will within the next couple of months.
Yeah.
How about you, Mike?
Nothing too crazy. I've been on like a regular exercise regimen for about 5 to 6 months, and I'm gonna try to resolve to continue doing that for all of 2019.
All right. Sounds good. All right, that was a little catch up from the.
Yeah. Yeah, because we've been away for a little while.
But
so-
what are Apple's resolutions? That's the question.
If anybody
Yes,
cares about
Apple's
mine, it's to
resolution.
write more. But yeah.
That's a great transition there.
It's a great transition. One of Apple's resolutions is to talk about their earnings,
Make more money.
make more money, but in a different way,
Sell more phones.
and to sell more phones, and also to get their services out there more through some products that were released at CES. So we'll talk about that. We're going to talk about Apple's presence at CES, but first we're going to talk about, I guess, more dramatic news that happened before the end of the year, that Apple made a revision to its Q1 2019 earnings estimates.
That was in the new year. It was like
Was it in the new
January
year?
2nd or 3rd or something.
Right,
Yeah,
you're right.
It was right over the hump.
You're
Yeah.
right. So I was out for a couple of weeks, so I wasn't paying attention much to anything. So you're right. It happened on January 2nd, right after the new year. So they made a revision. They revised their revenue to an estimate of approximately 84 billion.
Only 84 billion. What is
Right.
going on?
As opposed to, what was it before? Like 89?
It was 89 to 93 was the range.
Yeah. So, and a few other
Or
maybe
maybe 91. It was something like that.
Right. So they reduced their estimate by as much as $9 billion.
Or 7 or something. But it was significant, whatever it was.
Yeah. So,
I might be wrong about the 93.
And the reason why they had to make this revision was because they were basically saying that iPhone sales aren't happening in China. So,
Right.
That's what they said.
Well, that's what they say.
right.
Yes.
That's
There
what
was
they're
a lot.
saying.
There was a lot more to that letter than just sales are poor in China,
Yeah.
and that is a part of it. I'm sure, but there are other aspects as to why their revenue took a dip year over year, a pretty significant one year over year, where people were expecting it, maybe to even kind of come close to 100 billion. It's now less than last year's. I think it was 89 or 90 last year. So this isn't just China. Let's be clear about that. No matter what Apple wants us to think.
Well, it was interesting because in his letter to the employees, not the letter to the investors, he said towards the end, he says, now there have been some external factors in play, but we're not going to lean on those, which, in the letter to investors, they totally did lean on those.
Yeah.
And
You're right. The letter to employee was way clearer, plainer, and was more culpable. It said, listen, we didn't see a bunch of factors that were coming up on us in the fourth quarter or the first quarter, their first quarter. And this is what happened. It's not the end of the world, as a lot of people like to think it is, but it's the first revision they've had in probably like a decade or 10 to 15 years. It's been a while. And it just speaks to the fact that iPhone sales, they're not growing like they were.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, one thing is I was sitting out. I'm not educated in the idea of like financials and projecting sales and things like that. So I'm going to theorize here, and I don't know if I might be totally off base.
Let us have it, Roman.
So Apple
wouldn't be the first person.
Right, exactly. I wouldn't be the first.
Apple's financials, so don't worry about it.
So Tim Cook used to be Apple's COO, right?
Uh-huh.
Yes.
So things like this, things like estimating demand in China and things like that, isn't that supposed to be his forte? I
mean, at the time he was COO, channel inventory, all that stuff. But a lot of it is just predicting the future, and you can't do that with 100% accuracy. Yeah. I mean, he's been CEO for what has it been now? 7-8 years.
It's been a while, yeah.
And he has been on the money every single quarter. I mean, let's give the guy some credit. Right. We can't say that you screwed up, so you deserve to be fired. He's right. There are a lot of factors, and Apple got it wrong. Samsung got it wrong too, we should note, because yesterday they revised their forecast as well. So there are factors going on that accelerated in the fourth quarter of 2018 that a lot of these tech companies didn't foresee.
Yeah.
And you're talking about his former role. Apple's stock and everything has been going up for so long, the trillion. There's a lot of pressure, really. I know you got to be honest and stuff to make it, it's totally going to be going. Because if he was realistic and was by, ahead of time, well, we don't know about demand. And, everybody would be doing the same thing they're doing now. Horror.
Right. And it did, by announcing they weren't going to announce iPhone numbers. That was kind of a signal that said, listen, we don't think numbers are going to be what you want them to be or what they normally would be. So the stock was pretty much tanking before the announcement, and now it's at a relatively level plane over the last, I don't know, I guess it's been about a week. But I don't think Apple really cares too much about its stock price. They have billions and billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars at their disposal, regardless of the earnings per share price. And they're still one of the, if not the largest company in the world, depending on the day.
Yeah.
So it's a blip, it's a problem. They need to fix it, and I'm sure they will. But the bigger thing is that the iPhone isn't going to be Apple's number one device
Right.
forever. It just
Right.
isn't.
And Apple's
So-
been planning for that for
They
a couple
have.
of years now. So yeah.
And we're starting to see, and we'll get into this later with the stuff at CES and wearables and all that stuff. But the Apple has been working for a post iPhone world, just like Steve Jobs worked for a post Mac world.
Yes.
Right.
It's and during those transitions, and I don't even know if we're in one right now, but it will come soon if it's not right now. It's messy.
Yeah.
And the stock drops and all this happens. You know, Apple's stock plummeted before the iPhone came out. It plummeted before the iPod came out. This happens. It's not the end of the world, but it is out of character for Apple in this era that we're in.
And Steve has a quick question. How does shrouding the iPhone numbers and these numbers in general benefit the actual Apple investors?
Well, as far as the benefiting the investors, a lot of pressure was, or a lot of stock was placed on that iPhone number, 48 million, 70 million, whatever it was. Without that, you can look at, just strictly financials, and the growth doesn't have to come from unit sales, which is tough. So, because if unit sales drop by 2%, all of a sudden the stock went haywire. Without that pressure, and you're just looking now at revenue from different segments and revenue overall, that's an easier metric for Apple to show growth in.
And it was. I want to say one thing before I forget is in his letter to the employees too. He also pointed out that a lot of other things were up, iPad
and they
sales
are,
and
yeah.
services, and that's what he was saying like iPads were up by double digits. And
How many of those were returned because they were bent? Huh?
exactly. I've noticed that's kind of fallen off of the wayside.
Yeah,
last
always.
week.
That's what happens.
Yeah.
So then-
we move on to the next thing.
Well, the thing is, like the iPhone 6, it fell off because Apple actually implemented a policy, but haven't really seen anything like that. Yeah.
So I have a question then. How much? Because I feel like a large part of the reason why, obviously, their earnings aren't nearly as high is because of a reduced demand for phones, right? So I guess the question is, how much of that do you think is because the phones have not been an improvement enough, or is it the price? Or is it because people are just saying because of both of those other two things, they're just keeping their phone longer and doing more of a repair, replacement battery. Did the replacement battery program, was that a big impact?
Yes.
I'm gonna say
I'll say yes.
Which of those do you
all
think
of
is the
that.
most, biggest
all of that?
reason?
I think the biggest reason is that people are holding onto their phones more, and because not necessarily because features are incremental, but because technology is basically caught up. It's the big jump in like processing speed and stuff like that isn't happening as much as it is anymore.
Yeah.
So, so people can hold on to their phones longer now, and so I think I personally think, because I see all the time when I'm on the bus going to work, people are still using iPhone 6s, iPhone 7s. I'm seeing more notch phones, 10s and 10s's, but I see a lot of home button iPhones.
Yes.
And people
you're
are
gonna for
holding
a
on to
while,
those phones longer because they last longer. And, a lot of people only use texting and email, and maybe they'll play a game, but it's not a very sophisticated game, so it doesn't require a lot of processing. Their cameras and stuff like that, so they don't need to jump to the latest and greatest all the time.
And I have often wondered if people are actually kind of afraid to go over to Face ID because, everybody always talks about, I still got my home button, and that's when they talk about holding on, that's what the main thing they always go to. And I used to be one of those people, but, I do it now. And now the home button seems so backward. And
I think price is a huge factor as well. I mean, yes, they're expensive. But the bigger thing here is that customers are now being asked to foot the entire price of the phone and see it. So before they were $200, $300, $400 depending on your storage. People could walk into a store, drop $200 and walk out with a new iPhone. They cannot do that anymore. They're paying and they see $40 a month, $30 a month, $50 a month, And I'll just use my own example of my mom. She has a iPhone 6S, which is actually my old iPhone 6S. And she, I was talking to her about upgrading it. And she said, well, I went to the Verizon store and I don't want to pay $750 for a new phone. And I tried to explain to her that you always were paying that before and it was baked in. She doesn't care, and people don't care.
Yes.
The bottom line is they're paying that much money for a phone. And she says, well, I don't really use it that much. So then you start looking at, well, rather than $200, that's no big deal. At $750, you start evaluating, okay, do I need it? What do I use it for? What, is it that important to me? And then, you say, well, I'll wait till next year. I'll wait 2 years, whatever it is. And it's all these things that are factoring 10% of the buyers here, 10% of the buyers here, all factor into a dip that's enough to cause alarm.
Yeah.
On a more mundane level, I also want to say that, we had talked in previous podcasts, like, about a year ago, that because they were talking about how this was going to be like a, cleanup year. And last year was going to be like a cleanup year for iOS and stuff, a maintenance year. And, I remember we had, is that going to affect sales? Because, it's not going to have that awesome new stuff. So, not only are we, we're talking about the processors and everything, but, the actual experience of using it is not as magical.
There's very little reason to go from a 10 to a 10s.
Yes.
Probably the least since Apple's been making these phones. It's just, if you want the bigger screen, the Max is there, but it's very incremental from the 10 last year to the 10s this year.
If phones were, we'll just say, $100 cheaper, do you think that they would have had more total profit, or it's hard to guess.
Yeah,
but
I think it would have probably made up that $4 billion that they lost. Sure,
especially with the 10R.
that's a significant dip. $100.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that if they would have announced the iPhone XS at $899 and the iPhone XS Max at $999, that would have made a huge difference in how people perceive the upgrade and perceive the phone.
Yes.
By making the XS Max $1099, that is a psychological crazy barrier that I think people held off on.
Yeah.
And then they say, well, I don't really want the XS. I want the big one. I'm going to wait. And then the XR came out and that screwed everything up. And I think that it was planning. It was the breakdown of the models. And I think the pricing structure was a little out of whack this year.
So Apple, if you're listening, we all want cheaper phones.
I'm sure they're listening to my advice.
Yeah. So I guess where do you think Apple will earn more money in the future? Like, what's their future? You were saying before it was, they were on the Mac and the phone was like the next big moneymaker, right? What is their next big moneymaker?
Services.
Well, Apple's
this is a teed up for a transition room.
So Apple has said that, well, I don't know if they've outright said, but they have shown that they believe that their services is where they're going to be making their money in the future post iPhone era. So, and as evidence of that, we saw a lot of movement in services in regards to CES.
A fairly shocking amount of movement.
So CES is happening right now. It's the Consumer Electronics Show. It's in Las Vegas. It happens every year in January. It's basically the big showcase where companies show their new wares. Apple, I don't think they've never gone to CES.
Not in recent memory.
Yeah, so
I don't think they've ever been there because it was usually Macworld.
Yeah, they used to
had the same week,
right?
Or
They
a
used
week
to do
after
Macworld
or whatever.
Expo,
Yeah.
and then they even got ducked out of Macworld Expo. They were like, we don't need to do this trade show stuff anymore. So, so CES is where a lot of electronic stuff is showing, and Apple, even though they don't have a physical presence there, they have been announcing that. Well, Apple hasn't announced any deals, but a lot of TVs and other products have been announced that have Apple features. So they're
For HomeKit.
Yeah, so a lot of 4K TVs have come out with
AirPlay 2 and HomeKit support.
Right, AirPlay 2 and HomeKit support. There was a big announcement with Apple and Samsung.
Yeah, shocking.
So,
like huge. Yeah.
Yes.
I don't think it got enough attention, to be honest. I was I was on my couch with my kid on a Sunday afternoon, and I got an email from Samsung. I said, "Holy God, what?"
Mike, can
So
you
what-
can you explain what the deal is?
Sure. What they're doing is Samsung in spring of 2019 is going to install an iTunes movies and TV show app on their 2019 televisions, and then shortly thereafter their 2018 televisions. That means you're going to be able to watch iTunes movies, watch, buy, rent, without having an Apple TV hooked up to your Samsung television. That is bonkers crazy. That's as crazy as Windows Explorer being pre-installed on Macs in the 90s.
Yes.
That's nuts. I mean, these are bitter rivals, and Apple has never allowed an iTunes app on a non-Apple device. Well, they except for PCs.
And Samsung of all people.
Yeah, it's like, wow. So first of all, it's Samsung. Second of all, this opens up now Roku, Fire TV, all those different competing boxes. And the big question is, I have a Samsung TV. They make excellent TVs. A lot of people buy them. I have an Apple TV 4K hooked up to it. Why do I need to buy one? If I have a
hardware.
Samsung TV, what's the point now? All of the apps are available, Netflix, Hulu, whatever you want to do, HBO, they're all available on the Samsung Smart TV. I use it for iTunes. That's the reason why I have the box, because I have hundreds of movies and my kid uses it and we watch a lot of stuff. Once that app becomes available, why do I need an Apple TV 4K?
I'm going to say I don't think the Apple TV sells that well to begin with. This
Perhaps
is Apple positioning itself to go into the services jump, and it's
Maybe
putting
so.
its pieces in play.
It was a hobby.
Yes, exactly.
Steve
I always
Jobs
said it was a
introduced
hobby.
it as a
Yeah,
hobby.
he always said it was a hobby. And maybe this is where the hobby was ultimately leading. I don't know, but
Or
yep.
Consumer Life asks this question: is this just a sign of Apple's desperation?
No,
I mean, I think it's something that's been worked on for a little while.
Yeah.
I think it definitely speaks to Apple, I'll say finally, for lack of a better word, understanding where the industry is heading.
yes,
Apps,
Yes.
people don't want, boxes with apps on them. They want everything in one device.
yes,
Everything as a service. And that's what, Apple is starting to figure out that, when we say services, it doesn't just mean iCloud.
Right.
It could be, it's the video service and Netflix. It could be a phone. You can have a phone as a service. It could be a tablet. It could be a Mac. Everything can be a service
Yes.
in the sense that you're always paying for it and you're not,
Right.
paying
That's
a bunch of money
key.
up front. Yeah.
I will say that too. Going back to what I was saying, the Apple TV is the only Apple device I've never felt on some level like I gotta have it. I want a HomePod before I want an Apple TV.
Sure.
And-
The only reason why I have to have it is to watch iTunes movies because I have a lot of them.
Yes.
That's it. And
So-
you're right. Once that iTunes app is on other devices, it becomes much less of a product that you need. It doesn't really offer anything. The interface is fine. There's nothing great about it. It's a way to watch iTunes, and once you're there, I use it for Netflix and Hulu and stuff because it's just I don't want to switch the input.
Yes.
But once I don't need to go to it, it's going to sit there and collect dust.
Yeah, I think it was a better idea before every TV was a smart TV.
Yes.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Right. So
The other question is why haven't if Apple is doing this, why hasn't Apple teamed up with someone to put Apple TV on a television?
No.
Like Roku did with, I think it was TLC, or Amazon does it with I can't remember the brands, but you can buy a TV with Fire TV installed, with Roku installed on it. Will we get to the point where you can buy a Sony television with Apple TV installed on it?
I think this year we might be seeing more of that. With because I think this is when they're actually going to start announcing the services. and
Yeah,
stuff.
I think
Yeah.
for sure. Tim Cook kind of teased that yesterday in that interview with Jim Cramer, where he said we have some services coming down the pipe that, are whatever word he used. But it's interesting. That used to be Steve Jobs' line, where he would say we have some great new products in our roadmap, not a video service, a new iPod, a new iMac, whatever it was, and that would get people crazy. Now. Tim Cook's teasing a video service. We're teasing Apple Music updates. Like that's the next phase of where all this is going.
Yes. Agreed.
Or would you be interested in buying an Apple, like an actual television that was Apple TV?
Yep. Well, there were rumors.
You mean from Apple?
Yeah.
Yeah, there were rumors
Yeah.
a while ago that
Yeah,
Gene
years
Munster
ago.
kept pushing that.
Yeah. I
And
think
it
he's
never
still does.
happened.
It's gonna be so
So,
expensive. TVs are
This
already
was
expensive.
that was that big quote in this Steve Jobs' biography right before he died, or
Right.
right after he died. It was released, and he said to was it who wrote? I don't remember who wrote the book.
Walt
It just
Isaacson?
escaped me. Yeah, Walter Isaacson.
Mhm.
He said I finally cracked the code or something like that.
Yes.
And that was what 8-10 years ago, and we still haven't seen whether and like what exactly he was referring to it first of all, but there hasn't been anything really to suggest that Apple is indeed working on a 4K television. But if they did, like if Apple came out with a 4K 80-inch OLED TV, I would buy one in seconds.
Well, the thing is with TVs, the margins are so small. I mean, there was a recent article. I forget who posted it, but it was an interview with some TV executive, and they talking about how they don't, the TVs, it's the services. The TVs are now just this conduit for the services. So the margins on the TVs are really small, like 6%.
It's like game
Man,
consoles.
the margins on smartphones are small also, unless you buy an iPhone. Apple has a way of finding
Right.
places to make money on hardware.
But where they're making the money is the stuff that's done on the TV. So they're collecting information of what
Sure.
you're watching, things like that. So it's a device where they're getting the data. So that's where
Which
they're making
Apple
the money.
doesn't. They
Right. And that's
against-
another thing. Apple says they don't have a business plan where they make money that way.
Give you an idea of
So-
how that works. Like the PS4 or maybe it was the PS3. Yeah, Sony was actually losing money on the unit sales, but they made it up on everything else. So that gives you an idea of how that works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, that could be why we haven't seen a TV set from Apple, because they're not going to waste their time making a beautiful piece of hardware if they're not going to make 30% margins on
Right.
it.
it was a Verge article talking to Vizio's Bill Baxter. So I'll put a link to that in our show notes.
Vizio sells, they sell super cheap stuff.
Yeah.
They sell like a 50-inch 4K TV for like $500. It's pretty obvious they're not making money on that.
Yeah.
It's-
So yeah, I think the future we're going to see more of the Apple TV app on third-party TVs, and then they'll sell
iTunes. It's an iTunes app, just to be clear, not
Yeah.
an Apple TV app. Yeah.
So and then they'll continue to sell the device for people who don't have TVs that support it or whatever, and they'll sell like a dozen of those a year or something like that, or more than that. But that my point is, the way they're going to get their services out there is by putting it on TVs.
Well, interesting that you said that. We were kind of like hinting like the death of the Apple TV, and you said that it was it's important to note that it is an iTunes app, not an Apple TV app. What if the Apple TV becomes the app? That's
I mean, sure, that would be the interface that they would have to partner with somebody, Sony or whoever, to make that the interface. And there's a ton of them. There's Android TV, there's Roku, there's Fire TV. There's a bunch of those out there. And yeah, Apple, the Apple TV interface is nice, and it would work well on anything. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see that maybe even when they announce that video service that we're teaming up with Sony or we're teaming up with whomever to have Apple TV embedded into this TV set.
yes.
Who do you think that they would partner with? Because a lot of these companies all have their own services,
Yeah.
So it's like even TCL and partners with Roku, and Roku is now doing their own thing, right?
It would be one of the higher end, like Sony or maybe Panasonic or something like that, where it would be,
LG.
LG too. It would be higher end sets for sure. They're not going to sell, they're not going to put it, they're going to slap their name on these junky
name.
doorbusters.
Right. So
But anyway,
yeah. So but also so a lot of TVs are coming out with AirPlay 2 support. And there are a lot of HomeKit products that are being announced at CES. I haven't been able to keep track.
There's a surprising amount. Like every day, there's like another 3 or 4 that said, "Yeah, we're going to make a HomeKit version of this," or "We're adding HomeKit to that." I didn't expect all this to happen this year, or rather this week.
Yeah.
I've always, I admit I don't know about it because, I just have a small apartment, so I don't get into the whole smart home thing. But, I've always I've never quite understood why it took so long for it to to take on. And I admit I plead total ignorance on that. You know, why?
The main reason is that before, I think last year, it was a hardware thing because Apple's Apple.
Yes.
So you had a license, like basically get like a chip
Okay.
that put it into your product to have it work with HomeKit, and then by way of that Siri. Other things like Google Assistant and Alexa, it was just a software thing. So it was a lot easier to do, a lot cheaper to do. Apple removed that requirement, I want to say, in 2017.
Okay.
And that's why now we're seeing more manufacturers say it doesn't just support Alexa. So everything was Alexa and Google Assistant because it was the easier, cheaper way to do it.
Yeah.
Now it's going to be all three.
That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
There were actual products that you had Alexa, Google Assistant, and a HomeKit version that was separate because they had to build it differently.
Okay.
They don't have to do that anymore.
So Mike actually wrote an article and posted today about HomeKit. And it's great that HomeKit's getting more usage and stuff, but there's still this thing about Siri.
Yeah.
So, and do you want to elaborate on that a little bit, Mike?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so when you say a product supports HomeKit, there's two ways of doing it. One is through the Home app, which you can pick up your phone, and it's a nice little interface. You see all your stuff. You can tap something to turn it on and turn it off or adjust it or whatever. But the larger notion is using it through Siri, just like you do through an Echo with Alexa or through a Google Home with Google Assistant. You can say, I won't say because I don't want to turn it on in my office, but you can say blah, blah, turn on my lights, and it'll work. Fine. All of that stuff is great. But once you commit to using one of these smart smart assistants, you're agreeing to use it for a whole bunch of other different things. Alexa and Google Assistant do these things. They play games. They do all sorts of things. Siri really doesn't. It's very limited to what it can do, even on HomePod. It does music. It does smart control. It does, you can ask questions like who's the president and things like that. But when it comes to actually, using it for things beyond that, Alexa has thousands of skills. Google Assistant has thousands of actions. Siri doesn't really have that.
Yes.
And that's where I think people are going to start to realize that this thing, it doesn't just fall short in understanding or answering. It's actually pretty good at that stuff. Where I think it falls short is in what we expect these assistants to do, which is, really kind of be a home assistant and kind of like, do what we want them to do throughout the day.
And Shortcuts was meant to ease that way a little bit, but that's way too complicated. Yeah.
It's crazy how complicated that is.
Yeah.
No one is going, no normal person is going to do that. If you buy, yeah, right. It's not going to happen. I mean, I don't even know how many normal people really kind of get that deep into Alexa skills, and that's easy. You just press a button and it installs. Shortcuts is a whole thing. You got to if this happens, then that happens, and this, and you got to test them out, and it's just crazy. Yeah. So
when Siri Shortcuts was announced, it reminded me of when Automator was introduced.
Sure, that's exactly what it is. Yeah, for the
because that's what it basically is, and everybody was excited about Automator, but the thing was, Automator is not very easy to use. It's not not for your typical person. Right. It's cool. It works great, and it's easy once you're educated in how to use it. But, get like you said, your mom, my father-in-law, sit him down and say, here, make a Siri shortcut. He would just look at me and go, what do you want me to do?
And what it's supposed to happen is that app developers are supposed to make their own and then push them to people, and then you install them. Right. We'll see if that happens. What should have happened is Apple should have gotten all these app developers together, made a library of them, give them to people, let them use them for a year, and then release Shortcuts and say, look, now we're giving you this awesome way to do it yourself.
Yes.
It's backwards.
Yeah.
And henceforth, it's just, I think it's too complex and complicated.
And what I'd like to see, is some kind of, like you said, library, but, where you have highly voted ones, and, people can choose the ones that are most exciting.
And that's what Amazon has with the skills, and that's what Google Assistant has with actions. You can see which ones people are using. You can test them out. You can install them. You can uninstall them and remove them. It's all very easy. And, Apple likes to do things their own way. But in this instance, Amazon got it right.
Yes.
Well, I think in this instance also, it was kind of this thing where Apple was like looking at it and going, oh, we're falling behind. We need to do something. So they just
Sure.
pushed it out there.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, it's
instead
clear
of
that
building
they
the
gave
library,
it
yeah.
thought, and they, it
Right,
works well. If you know what you're doing, it's an amazing app.
But it doesn't feel
But-
like Apple. It feels like something you expect from
It-
Windows
well,
or something.
That's true. Yeah, it's not. It doesn't have that like super elegance and ease of
Yes.
use that Apple's at that, but it's incredibly powerful.
Yes.
It makes me more frustrated that Siri can't do these things without going into that, because if this is what you're able to do, Siri's a lot more powerful than we think it is.
Right.
It's totally true. Right.
Yeah.
And, and give you an idea that shows that in a lot of ways you don't necessarily have to invade that privacy. A lot of the, a lot of people are
that's right.
saying that, Siri, is not as powerful as the other ones because, Apple doesn't allow access to data. But, with shortcuts, it's doing some pretty amazing things. But, it's, Apple hasn't unlocked it in that way.
And maybe that's why there isn't a library, because they can't figure out a way to have like a central server of these things that beam to your devices without, or by still anonymizing the data or randomizing. I don't know.
Yeah.
But the shortcuts is personal. It's on your device. It doesn't leave your device, and it's good. It works well. It's not for everyday people, which is
No.
80% of the people who have an iPhone, probably more.
Yeah.
There are about three shortcuts that I use on regular basis, but they are very arcane things. They're not even things that I would recommend to you. Like there's one that, puts a frame of an iPhone around your screenshots. Yeah.
Oh yeah, sure. I've seen that.
And that's from Vitici.
Mac Stories.
Yeah, the Mac Stories. So it's that is the most useful one I've ever seen. Yeah. But that gives you an idea.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of Mac Stories, he came out with one yesterday. That was, it's really cool. It collects all of your data from Apple Music and shows you what you listen to most in 2018. It is the most complex thing. It's amazing that he was able to do it and distribute it.
Yes.
But nobody would A, have the patience, or B, have the wherewithal to sit and make this. They might want to. They're never going to do it.
Can you imagine your mom?
So kudos to Vitici for doing it. But
Right.
if that's what it takes to get these things to work well, that's crazy.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So,
Not to mention, he's like a workflow expert.
Yes,
Right,
exactly.
right.
Yeah, and that's the thing. This is not like your mom sitting
No.
down and figuring this out.
He,
Not at
he
all.
was using this stuff before it was shortcuts. He eats, sleeps, and breathes this stuff.
Yes.
yeah. So while it can be difficult to build your own Siri shortcuts, it's not so difficult as building your own Bose Bluetooth headphones.
There we go.
That is very true.
Especially if you have the Bose Build Bluetooth headphones, which a lucky person has,
Yes.
is getting a new pair. Leif, we're having a
You get that
giveaway.
transition for free too.
Yes. So yeah, congratulations, Richard from Arizona.
Woo!
You are the proud new owner, or your kid is, of a pair of Bose Build headphones. Yes.
Yeah, so we started a giveaway last year, a couple weeks ago, of some Bose Build Bluetooth headphones for people to enter. There's also a review by Dan Masuoka.
That's me.
He reviewed them and tried them out and built a pair. And but we also had a pair to give away, so
Congratulations.
we're giving them away to Richard from Arizona. Hope you enjoy those. So we'll be in touch with Richard to get his contact information to get him.
Check
his
your
Bose headphones.
spam.
Yeah,
if you're
check your
listening.
Yes.
spam. Yes.
Be sure to check your spam. So
We had an iPhone that we had stuck for 2 months because the people weren't picking it up. Yeah. So yeah, you could be keep in mind. Yeah.
Although now that Apple
surprisingly,
released maybe they just didn't want it, Leif.
surprisingly, it was harder to give away the stuff than we thought. So
Yes. Right.
Maybe they did. Maybe they were getting your emails. They just said, nah.
I don't want it.
No problem entering.
I like my home button.
Before we wrap up, there were some questions on social, and one of them is just kind of just like some light predictions on 2019. And Tomi on YouTube was asking if you foresee any additional haptic features coming to the iPhone X or 10R in this coming year.
You mean like 3D touch?
Yeah, or potentially developing something a little bit different since it doesn't quite have some of the built-in features, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. My gut says the 10R, the 10RS or 2, whatever they're going to call it, is going to be pretty much the same as this one with a better processor, slightly better camera, because that was the first model of it. So the way Apple usually does it is it's an S, and it's not a huge upgrade. I mean, I think those things cost money. I think the way they make it with the LCD and the design, I think that they were choices not made because of something they didn't want to do. It was made because of price and because of design and engineering. So I doubt that'll change. But what I would like to see is develop some kind of a software solution to 3D Touch, which they could do, and a lot of phones do have. So I don't know if it would affect the haptic, but it might affect the functionality.
Yeah. The more interesting touch stuff, is I'm like, it doesn't do with the iPhone. It has to do with like whatever those, if they do their headphones or updated AirPods and stuff. I could see some improved stuff on that. But
I think music and video will be a big deal. So I think headphones. I think we'll get new AirPods too. I think AirPlay, or what is it called, AirPower?
AirPower.
I think that will make an appearance at some point. I think the iPhones are going to be, nothing. I don't think Apple's going to swing for the fences and say, okay, now we have to redesign the iPhone again and come out with all this stuff. I think it's going to be just another simple, relatively minor upgrade to the iPhone. Same thing with the Apple Watch. I think the Mac will see some, definitely that at least a peek at that new Mac Pro that they keep talking about.
Right.
I think there may be even a MacBook Pro redesign. We'll see with a new keyboard and a new design. But what I don't want to see is Tim Cook or anyone else panic.
Yes.
And say, okay, now we have to come out with something in 6 months. Work on something. Take your time. If it takes to 2020, 2021, whatever it is, but don't rush something, because that's a disaster.
Yes. And especially for Apple. Apple should not rush things. So,
Hey, I don't think we ever heard Leif's New Year's resolution. He was talking about his hair, but I don't think that's a resolution.
I snuck it in there. I just said I want to write more. So
good. All right.
Yes, I want to be like Mike, because that kid writes so much. That's
a good resolution.
Yes.
Write as much as Mike.
Yes,
that's a resolution.
I'm not going to read. I'm not going to make that one. But yeah, I'll write more. Yes, because it was funny. Like on Sunday, he sent something in. I was like, "Good God!"
Don't emulate me. I'm insane.
But yes, I will also try to lose weight.
So I think that just about does it for this week's episode of the Macworld Podcast, episode 635.
Wow.
So I'd like to thank Mike Simon on the remote. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
To Leif Johnson.
Thank you.
Thanks to Dan, our producer.
You're welcome.
I'd like to thank you, the audience. Thanks for joining us. Join us next week. We usually broadcast live on Wednesdays at 10 a.m. Pacific. So check our website for any details. We'll come up with topics and post those on the website as well. So anyways, thanks for joining us. See you next week.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.